me now is Stephen Moore. He served as an economic advisor to the Trump campaign. He's a distinguished fellow at the Heritage Foundation. And Catherine Rampell, she is an opinion columnist for the Washington Post and a contributor here at CNN. All right, we've got a lot of time here, which is a good thing because, in fact, we're going to need it. Let's get first to the Fed comments and the president. Stephen, you know I'm coming to you for this one. These comments were extraordinarily blunt, and even to say something like, no, I won't fire him, as if that would be easy or as if there's cause. You have been much more orthodox on this than the president, I want to say. I mean, are you happy the fact that he's calling out the Fed, and do you think it spooks the markets?
I don't know if I'd call my views orthodox. I tend to agree with Trump that there was no real reason for these rate hikes, and I think one of the things that's really spooked the markets is not necessarily this particular rate hike, but their announcement that rates are going to continue to go up and up and up. And I think that their benchmark for 18 months from now was like 3.7%. Well, that's well above the inflation rate. And I think that has, spooked investors. And I think it's wrong. I mean, the Fed has one job and one job only, and that is to keep inflation under control, in my opinion. And look, we've got, as you just said, inflation is under control. That was exactly spot on correct.
From what we've seen.
But I mean, it's been under control for a long time, and there's no real indication that prices are going to rise, except for the fact that you do have wage increases, and that's something we wanted.
Stephen, does that mean we're just going to throw out Fed independence here? The president is just allowed to.
The Fed is independent. That nobody is calling into question that. The question is whether it's appropriate for the president, as the chief executive of our economy, to call out the Fed when he thinks they're wrong, and I don't have a problem with that. I think they are wrong.
Catherine?
I think there are two issues here. One is what the Fed's doing appropriate, and reasonable people can disagree about the pace of Fed hikes, but we are into one of the longest recoveries on record. We have, as I'm sure you would love to point out, unemployment at whatever it is, 49-year lows. Inflation has been picking up a little bit. It's still not out of control, obviously. Trump just dumped $2 trillion worth of fiscal stimulus into the economy. These are exactly the conditions under which you would expect a Federal Reserve to decide to tighten gradually as they have. So that's one question, which is what the Fed is doing appropriate? And I think a lot of economists would agree, even if they might quibble with the exact pace. The second question is it appropriate for the President of the United States to jawbone the Fed? And it is absolutely not appropriate. Central bank independence is incredibly crucial to the long-term health of this economy, and the Fed has fought over decades to safeguard both its actual independence and perceptions of its independence. Part of the reason why we had inflation in the 70s that Volcker then had to tamp down is in part that presidents in the 70s were jawboning the Fed, were publicly putting pressure on the Fed. The Fed has worked very hard to make sure that people credibly believe that they are looking out for the stability of our currency, for the stability of prices. And as long as the President of the United States is making these public comments, calling them loco, that puts all of that into question.
He was bilingual. That was very good. Loco and crazy. I give the president full credit.
Gone wild, yes.
But, Stephen, it's a point to be made here. If you believe in the Fed's independence, why say anything at all unless you're just using it as a political statement? And you don't care that the market's down more than 500 points right now.
There is this view out there that somehow these people who run the Fed have some kind of oracle where they know what the answer is.
But they have all the data.
I mean, it's about the public perception about whether there is political influence.
Is wrong. I mean, you mentioned the 1970s. Only idiots would have been doing what the Fed did in the 1970s, where they created, 15% inflation and 20% mortgage interest rates. I mean,
and
only a moron would be in favor of that.
That's because
let me mention another example, though. We had a major financial crisis, right, in 2007 and 2008. The Fed had a major role in that by inflating the economy, zero interest rates, and it just pumped money into the housing market. I was at the Wall Street Journal for 5 years before that. We were warning month after month after month after month that they were creating a bubble.
It's interesting that you only care about inflation when Trump is not in office, but not when he is in office.
The Fed is not like the Pope. They're not infallible, and they've made a lot of mistakes.
No, I don't have a problem with you criticizing the Fed. I don't have a problem with Paula criticizing the Fed. I have a problem with the President of the United States criticizing the Fed.
He runs the economy. I mean,
but you don't.
But then why have Fed independence? If you think that you interfering and you, as Catherine says, jawbone the Fed.
Because I think the Fed should take into account the president's view on this, right?
No, they absolutely should not.
I mean, why?
Because presidents always have an incentive to play the Phillips curve, to pump a little bit more money into the economy, especially during an election year, so that you can squeeze a little bit more growth out of it, which runs the trade-off risk of having inflation down the line. That's why you want the central bank to be independent so that they have the freedom to do unpopular things like jack up interest rates, like take the punch bowl away. And if there is a public perception out there that the president is in fact threatening the Fed behind the scenes or is screening potential Fed picks, as Kevin Warsh had actually, who was shortlisted for the Fed chair, actually said he was screened. He said Trump was asking him elaborate questions about his views on interest rates.
Well, what's wrong with that?
Because you want the Fed to be independent.
Then why have the president even pick who the head of the Fed is? Look, my point is this. The real economy is as strong as it's been in 30 years. I mean, every indication in terms of investment, employment, we're going to get 4% GDP growth for the third quarter.
And yet it's not appropriate to be tightening? Given those circumstances?
And it's the best of all worlds. We have no inflation. So my point is, and I think Trump is making this point.
So keep the punch bowl.
No, yeah, exactly.
More punch. More punch
Not more
for everyone.
punch. Don't take the punch bowl away just because the party is rolling. You know, the biggest problem with the American economy over the last 20 years, I think you would agree with this, is that wages haven't been rising for middle-class workers. We made this the central focus of our agenda. How do we get middle-class wages up? They're finally starting to rise, and the Fed looks at that and says, oh, no, that's inflationary. Is it, how are we going to get wages?
How are we going to get wages? They have said nothing, nothing close to that.
They've been looking at wages.
They look at PCE, core PCE.
And they look at wages. I know they do. I talk to Fed economists all the time. And how are we ever going to get wages up if every time we get a wage increase, they take the punch bowl away and say, we can't have it?
If you have a fiscal stimulus and that's what's goosing the economy, then it is perfectly appropriate for the Fed to see itself as a
stimulus. It's an investment-led recovery. That
is not what the Fed, the CBO, the IMF, every single outside
Catherine,
independent
look around the country. Every single city from Portland, Maine to Portland, Oregon has the biggest construction boom in the history of this country.
Every single outside independent forecaster
have you looked with your two eyes at what's happening in America?
I have.
Look at the construction numbers. They're off the charts.
Would you let me finish, please? Every single outside independent forecaster, including the Fed, including the CBO, including the IMF, including the Penn Wharton budget model, every single one says that we will have a temporary boost from the tax cut, and then we will revert to our long-term trend.
Catherine's quoting the same people who didn't predict the Trump economic boom. So they got to you're citing the very people who said that Trump's policies were going to cause a recession.
I got
a boom. And
I got a call. I got a call time for this moment as we continue to watch the market claw back from there. I invite both of you back.
It's a good time to buy stocks right now. Stocks are really cheap now.
Now Steven's advice.
Not according to
Listen, we will have you guys back for this. I love these interviews where I don't have to do anything at all. I will advise, believe it or not, folks, these are the debates that Catherine and Steven just had that are going on within the Oval Office, because I know there is a lot of debate between Treasury right now and the West Wing about what should be done about the Fed, if anything at all. Thank you both. Now,